Well, I've never belonged to anyone, and I'm not about to start now. Khalid took a step back, surprised not by her strength, but by what she wasn't saying. You've never? Kendra crossed her arms. That's right. I've never given myself to anyone. Not the way the media imagines. She wasn't just a wounded heiress. She was untouched, fierce, and unpredictable. He swallowed, unsure what to say. Why tell me this? Because you need to know I'm not a pawn. You chose me because you thought I'd be easy to manipulate. But if I'm going to be your pretend wife, let's start with the truth. Her voice dropped a note lower. I won't be seduced. I won't be owned. And I certainly won't be pitied. As she ran back laughing, soaked from head to toe, she saw Khalid watching from the hallway. You find this funny? He asked, voice dry. It's water, she grinned. Not acid. He shook his head but allowed a rare smile. You're the strangest woman I've ever met. And you're the most boring man I've ever married. They both paused and laughed. For the first time, it didn't feel like war. It felt like something new. Weeks passed, and the mansion that once felt like a sterile hotel began to feel different. Alive. Late into the night, the Lagos skyline sparkled like a sea of stars. From the penthouse suite of Danjuma Towers in Banana Island, the city lights stretched endlessly across the lagoon, casting a golden reflection through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside the sleek, glass-walled office on the 40th floor, Khalid Danjuma stood silently, a crystal tumbler of whiskey in his hand, his sharp gaze fixed on the city. But his mind was elsewhere. Only a few years ago, Khalid's life was defined by ambition, precision, and unstoppable success. As the only son of Nigeria's real estate magnate, he had inherited not only wealth, but a natural knack for business. Raised in a home full of love and elegance, Khalid once believed love was the ultimate achievement, the one thing that could not be bought. He had given his heart freely once, completely, naively. But that trust was shattered. Her name had been Isabella Beautiful, calculating and ultimately unfaithful. Khalid had discovered the truth the worst way possible, walking into his Lekki apartment only to find her wrapped in the arms of his biggest business rival. Every kiss, every whisper of forever had been a lie, a setup to get close to him and betray him. That betrayal turned Khalid cold. He stopped believing in love and began treating every relationship like a deal. Emotions were liabilities. He buried himself in contracts, acquisitions, and quarterly earnings. Trust was a currency he no longer traded. But Lagos society has a way of luring even the coldest hearts back into the spotlight. That night, the grand ballroom of the Lagoon Pearl Hotel was ablaze with light. Nigeria's elite had gathered for the chairman's gala, a prestigious event known as much for its fashion as for its political and business networking. It was not Khalid's favorite kind of evening, but as the face of Danjuma Properties, appearances mattered. He stood near the champagne bar, dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, calm and distant amid the laughter and glamour. At his side, his longtime friend and university roommate, Michael Eze, took a sip of wine and smirked. You're going to keep wearing that funeral face all night? Michael teased, nudging Khalid playfully. I'm enjoying myself, Khalid replied dryly, swirling his drink. In my own way. Michael followed his gaze to a cluster of women gathered near the gold-trimmed staircase. One in particular stood out. A striking young woman with deep brown skin, red braids cascading over her shoulders, and a silver gown that clung to her frame with just the right amount of scandal. Her laughter rang like bells, loud and carefree. That's Kendra Okon, Michael said, his voice tinged with amusement. The media's favorite disgrace, daughter of Senator Okon, party addict, scandal magnet, the one who once threw champagne in a commissioner's face. Khalid glanced at her, expression unreadable. And? Michael leaned in with a mischievous smile. I bet you can't turn her into a perfect society lady in 3 months. Khalid arched a brow. You want me to groom a rebel into a queen? Michael lifted his glass. Exactly. 3 months. If you succeed, I'll wire $2 million to your charity foundation. Khalid stared at Kendra across the room. He didn't see a challenge. He saw an opportunity to prove once again that nothing was beyond his control. Not even the most untamable woman in Lagos. Deal, he said with a cold smile, raising his glass. What neither of them expected was that the woman in question was watching them just as carefully. Across the ballroom, Kendra Oken felt the weight of eyes on her. She was used to it. From the moment she stepped into any room, whispers followed. Ever since her mother died, her father's political ambitions had drowned whatever warmth was left in their home. Her stepmother made life unbearable. Kendra had found solace in chaos, nightclubs, fashion shows, fast cars. She wasn't trying to rebel, she was trying to survive. Now at 24, her father was pushing her into an arranged marriage with a 49-year-old oil tycoon. It was all about image, power, alliances. Love had no place in the conversation. Kendra caught Khalid's gaze from across the room. The way he looked at her wasn't lecherous or dismissive. It was calculating. Dangerous. But he was her only way out. 1 week later, Kendra sat in Khalid's Banana Island penthouse, overlooking the silent lagoon. Between them lay a pristine folder, crisp as the man who placed it on the table. 3 months, Khalid said, sliding the contract toward her. Pretend to be my wife. Attend events. Live with me. Be presentable. Kendra raised a brow. And at the end of 3 months, you walk away with enough money to start your own life, on your own terms, no strings. She leaned back on the velvet couch, legs crossed, fingers tapping against the contract. No kissing, no love scenes. This is a business arrangement, not a romance novel, he replied flatly. A slow smile spread across her lips. Good. Then let's get married. The wedding took place at Ikoyi Registry, attended by only a few people, his lawyer, her best friend, and a hired photographer. Kendra wore a simple ivory gown and sunglasses. Khalid wore a navy blue senator suit, emotionless as ever. There were no kisses, no wedding cakes, just signatures, legal witnesses, and a cold exchange of vows. Do you, Khalid Danjuma, take this woman to be your wife? I do. And do you, Kendra Oken, take this man to be your husband? Kendra gave a little smirk. I do. The photographer snapped a picture just as she raised her brow mockingly at Khalid. And that night they returned to the Danjuma estate, a sprawling modern palace nestled in Old Ikoyi. The honeymoon suite was decorated with white roses, soft jazz, and a tray of untouched jollof rice and grilled tilapia. Kendra stood at the floor-length window in a silk robe, watching the city below. Behind her, Khalid removed his cufflinks. Shall we begin the performance, Mrs. Danjuma? Kendra turned slowly, her eyes sharp. This marriage lasts 3 months, Mr. Danjuma. Nothing more. He stepped closer, a ghost of a smile on his lips. I've handled more difficult projects than you. She tilted her head. And I've survived worse men than you. Their eyes locked. 2 players, 2 wounded hearts hiding behind cool exteriors. The real game had begun. The grand Danjuma estate glowed under the soft light of ornamental lanterns. Tucked behind tall iron gates and shaded by royal palm trees, the mansion stood like a modern fortress, a mix of sleek marble, tall glass panels, and quiet secrets. Kendra Oken had seen wealth before, but this was different. This wasn't loud or new money flashy. It was generational wealth, the kind that whispered power without needing to shout. As the chauffeur opened the door to the black Mercedes Maybach, Kendra stepped out into her new world. Inside, the house smelled of fresh orchids and expensive cedarwood. The live-in staff lined up quietly at the entrance, bowing slightly as Khalid walked past them without a word. Kendra followed, her silver heels clicking softly on the marble floor, her silk gown trailing behind her like mist. They entered the honeymoon suite. It was beautiful, too beautiful. White roses lined the floor, satin sheets were drawn across a massive 4-poster bed, and soft jazz hummed from hidden speakers. Candles flickered along the walls, bathing the room in gold. But Kendra felt none of it. She walked to the tall glass window overlooking the lagoon. arms folded as if shielding herself from a storm. "Is this where I'm supposed to pretend to be the blushing bride?" she asked, her voice cool. Khalid removed his wristwatch, placing it on the dresser with practiced precision. "We play our roles. That's what we agreed." She turned to face him. "And when the curtains fall, what then?" "Then you walk away rich, and I walk away undefeated." A silence fell between them. Kendra moved to the center of the room and slowly untied the sash of her robe, not seductively but confidently. She let it slip to the floor, revealing a modest white slip beneath. Her skin glowed in the candlelight, but there was a sharpness in her eyes that warned, "This is not your conquest." Khalid's eyes trailed across her figure, but not with hunger, with curiosity. He stepped forward, but before he could speak, Kendra raised her hand, halting him. "Let me be clear," she said, her tone now like ice. "I am not who you think I am." Khalid tilted his head slightly, intrigued. "Oh? I know what this is. A bet. A game. You think you can mold me like clay. I'm here because I need an escape from a life designed by my father and stepmother. But don't mistake that for weakness." Khalid remained silent, assessing her. Kendra took a breath and continued. "You think I'm a spoiled rebel with a wild streak. You think this will be easy." There was a faint crack in her voice now, but she stood firm. "Well, I've never belonged to anyone, and I'm not about to start now." Khalid took a step back, surprised not by her strength, but by what she wasn't saying. "You've never?" Kendra crossed her arms. "That's right. I've never given myself to anyone. Not the way the media imagines. Every scandal, every late-night party, every reckless drive, they were all distractions. But I'm still mine." The silence that followed was deafening. Khalid, who had assumed she was another socialite floating through life, felt the foundations of his assumptions crumble beneath him. She wasn't just a wounded heiress. She was untouched, fierce, and unpredictable. He swallowed, unsure what to say. "Why tell me this?" "Because you need to know I'm not a pawn. You chose me because you thought I'd be easy to manipulate. But if I'm going to be your pretend wife, let's start with the truth." Her voice dropped a note lower. "I won't be seduced. I won't be owned. And I certainly won't be pitied." For the first time in a long while, Khalid felt something shift within him. Not lust, not amusement, but a flicker of something like admiration. He nodded once. "Understood." Kendra walked past him, picked up her robe and slipped it back on. She poured herself a glass of water and sat at the edge of the bed, her spine straight and unshakable. "I'll sleep on the couch," Khalid said after a moment. Kendra looked at him. "Do as you please. Just know I'm not a doll to dress up and parade around. You want a trophy wife for your bet? I'll play the part, but you don't own the player." The following morning, sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. Kendra had barely slept. Her body ached from tension, but her spirit held steady. She walked into the massive walk-in closet filled with tailored dresses, heels, and designer pieces, none of which she picked. A silent team of stylists had delivered them after the wedding. There were no notes, no instructions, just tastefully curated power looks and red carpet elegance. She chose a white silk blouse and high-waisted emerald trousers, pairing them with gold hoops and a bold red lip. If she was going to be a symbol of transformation, she would do it on her own terms, with fire in her veins. Downstairs, Khalid was already seated at the long breakfast table, dressed immaculately in a deep blue caftan. His laptop was open, but his eyes flicked up the moment she entered. He said nothing. Neither did she. A maid poured her tea. Kendra sipped slowly. "You're trending already," Khalid said coolly, turning his screen toward her. A blog headline flashed, "Wild Child Kendra Marries Billionaire Danjuma Redemption or Publicity Stunt." Kendra laughed. "Let them talk. I've lived under scrutiny my whole life." He studied her, unsure how someone so scorned by society could remain so unaffected. "Why don't you fight back?" he asked. She looked at him, her gaze piercing. "Because the truth doesn't need a press release. I know who I am." He paused, then said, "This might work better than I thought." Kendra smiled, slow and dangerous. "Careful, Khalid. You might start believing your own bet." That night, they attended their first public event as a couple, a charity ball hosted by the Lagos Women's Initiative. The media swarmed them at the entrance. Flash bulbs, screaming voices, questions flying. Kendra gripped his arm. Not because she needed to, but because appearances mattered. He leaned in, whispering, "Smile for the camera, Mrs. Danjuma." She did, but her smile wasn't warm. It was the polished armor of a woman who knew the world was watching and refused to blink first. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere sparkled with glittering gowns, champagne towers, and conversations laced with power plays. Eyes followed them everywhere, some curious, some skeptical, some envious. But Kendra held her head high, moving with the confidence of someone who had nothing to prove, yet everything to lose. As the evening wore on, Khalid began to notice what others couldn't see. The graceful way Kendra deflected invasive questions, the composed way she held her glass, the subtle elegance that was emerging from behind the mask. She wasn't becoming someone else. She was finally being seen. From the outside, the Danjuma estate was every architect's dream. Perched along the Lagos Lagoon in Ikoyi, the sprawling mansion was a masterpiece. White marble columns, cascading fountains, arched doorways, and sculpted gardens that looked like they belonged on a magazine cover. But to Kendra Okon, it felt like a gilded prison. And inside, the house was unnaturally silent, too perfect, too cold. Meals were served on schedule by uniformed chefs and housekeepers who moved like shadows. Every vase was symmetrical. Every painting had a backstory older than Nigeria's independence. Every piece of furniture looked untouched. Even the air conditioning had no sound. It reminded Kendra of her father's house, elegant on the outside, but hollow within. Just like her marriage to Khalid Danjuma. 3 days had passed since the wedding, and she hadn't had a real conversation with her husband. He left the house early each morning, in suits too crisp and eyes too unreadable, returning late and heading straight to his home office without a word. They lived like flatmates. No arguments, no affection, just cold formality. The only warmth came from the soft Lagos sun that filtered through her massive bay windows. But Kendra wasn't one to sit still. She dressed extravagantly every day, lounging in luxury loungewear she didn't buy, receiving spa treatments she didn't ask for, and scanning through tabloids that still referred to her as the wild Okon heiress. The headlines followed her every move. From champagne fights to charity galas, can Kendra be tamed? Khalid's wife wears gold at a funeral? Lagos society cringes. Mrs. Danjuma parties until 3 a.m. again. Kendra sipped her tea and smirked. Let them talk. She made it worse by attending every high society event she could find. She smiled for the cameras, danced in glittering heels, and once arrived at a fundraiser on a speedboat just for the drama. Khalid never said a word. Even when she returned home at 2 a.m., makeup smudged, hair tousled, the security staff would open the door with quiet deference, and she'd pass Khalid in the hallway, still dressed in his black caftan, eyes calm, a glass of cognac in hand. He didn't lecture. He didn't ask. And that infuriated her more than any argument could. One evening, she stormed into the library, her silk robe flowing behind her like a storm cloud, only to find Khalid seated by the fireplace, reading. Say something, she snapped. You don't care if I show up drunk at a gala? If I make headlines for racing a Bentley down Ozumba Mbadiwe? He looked up, calm as ever. No, she repeated, stunned. You don't care what people say about your wife? Khalid closed his book gently. People have always talked about you. That's not new. And this marriage isn't real, remember? You do what you want. His voice was even, controlled. But Kendra caught the flicker of something in his eyes. Was it disappointment? She stepped closer, suddenly unsure if she was trying to push him or reach him. What is this to you, Khalid? A bet? A puppet show? Am I just a test to prove how powerful you are? He stood, towering and unreadable. At first, maybe. But now, You're starting to surprise me. That caught her off guard. He moved past her, pausing at the door. You wear chaos like perfume, Kendra, but I've started to notice the scent underneath. And then he was gone. The next day, Kendra stumbled into something she hadn't expected, a moment of kindness. She was walking past the back kitchen when she heard hushed voices. I don't know how to pay the fees this term, madam. The private school keeps calling, said one of the maids, clearly distressed. Kendra paused. Then quietly she stepped into the room and slipped an envelope onto the counter. This should cover your son's tuition, but don't tell anyone it came from me, she said softly. The maid's eyes widened in shock and gratitude. Thank you, madam. Thank you. Kendra gave her a small smile. You're welcome. She turned to leave, unaware that Khalid had seen everything from the hallway. Later that night, while reviewing the company's financial reports in his study, Khalid couldn't stop thinking about what he had witnessed. Kendra, the woman who once danced barefoot on private yachts, was helping a maid behind closed doors. No paparazzi, no cameras, just compassion. A few nights later, he followed her out of the estate, curious now, not controlling. Her driver dropped her off on the outskirts of Abu Meta. She got out with 2 heavy bags and made her way to a row of makeshift tents under the Third Mainland Bridge. There, she handed out food, sanitary products, and blankets to homeless families. No selfies, no PR crew. She just sat on a stone bench and listened to their stories. Khalid stayed in the car, stunned. He had judged her, shaped her into a stereotype in his head. But this woman was full of contradictions. Publicly reckless, privately generous. Loud in appearance, quiet in goodness. Back at the mansion, things began to shift. The air between them was no longer cold. It wasn't warm either, but it was less sharp. They began speaking more about politics, books, even childhood stories. He found her perched by the window most nights, sketching scenes from her day, market women laughing, the lagoon at sunset, the face of a boy she met near Barriga. He once joined her quietly, watching her draw. She didn't ask him to leave. Then came the night of the first storm. Rain poured across the compound like a cleansing flood. Kendra had forgotten her scarf on the back porch. She dashed out barefoot to retrieve it, just as lightning split the sky. As she ran back laughing, soaked from head to toe, she saw Khalid watching from the hallway. You find this funny? He asked, voice dry. It's water, she grinned. Not acid. He shook his head but allowed a rare smile. You're the strangest woman I've ever met. And you're the most boring man I've ever married. They both paused and laughed. For the first time, it didn't feel like war. It felt like something new. Weeks passed, and the mansion that once felt like a sterile hotel began to feel different. Alive. The staff noticed it first. The silence that used to hang like fog had slowly started to lift. There was music again. Kendra had a habit of playing old-school Afrobeats in the morning, humming while sipping coffee. Sometimes Khalid would step out of his study and pause by the stairwell, quietly listening to her sing under her breath. They had fallen into a rhythm, not of lovers but of something gentler, more tentative. Each day, Khalid found himself paying attention to the small things. How Kendra always rearranged the flowers on the hallway console. How she ran her fingers over the spines of his books when she passed the library. How she always smiled at the gatekeepers before leaving the estate. It was unsettling. He had entered this arrangement to win a bet, but somewhere in the middle of board meetings and gala appearances, he had begun to care, and that terrified him. One quiet Saturday, Kendra walked into the library and found Khalid sitting at the desk, papers spread before him. Do you ever take a break? She asked, carrying a bowl of sliced mangoes. Khalid glanced up. Work doesn't wait. She set the bowl beside him and sat across from him, eyes glancing at the financial documents. You're restructuring Danjuma Holdings? His brows lifted. You understand what you're looking at? I studied business for a year in Cape Town, she said, popping a mango slice into her mouth. Before my dad pulled me back home to start parading me like a senator's daughter. He stared at her, surprised again. She always came with new layers. You ever consider investing in social housing in Makoko? She asked, pointing to one of his urban redevelopment maps. There's land around that axis the government will sell for cheap. You could build sustainable, low-income flats. It'll shift your public image, too. Khalid leaned back, impressed despite himself. You've been reading my reports? She grinned. Don't flatter yourself. Your papers are boring, but your margins are tight. You need goodwill. Their eyes met and lingered. It was the kind of gaze that held warmth. Not passion, not tension, just something dangerously close to understanding. The next morning, the media was filled with images of them attending a cultural gala together at the Nike Art Gallery. Kendra wore a regal red Aso-oke dress with gold embroidery. Khalid stood tall in a matching agbada, his hand lightly placed on the small of her back. To the public, it looked like love. To Kendra, it felt like something she could almost believe in. As they walked into the gallery, she whispered, "Is this the part where we pretend to adore each other for the cameras?" Khalid didn't smile. Who says we're pretending? Kendra blinked, caught off guard. Before she could reply, photographers swarmed them, and the moment passed. Days later, something even stranger happened. It rained again. This time they were already outside, on the upstairs balcony, sipping palm wine and watching the city lights shimmer under the clouds. When the rain began, Kendra didn't run. She leaned over the railing, tilted her head back, and let it wash over her. Khalid stood behind her, stunned by the sight. Her braids were soaked, her face bare of makeup, her white shirt clinging to her skin. But she looked free, wild, beautiful in a way no gown could capture. He stepped closer, hesitant. You're insane, he murmured. She turned, eyes gleaming. You're just scared. Of what? Feeling something real again. He didn't answer. Couldn't. Because she was right. That night, Kendra didn't go to her room. She sat on the couch in Khalid's office, barefoot, wrapped in a throw blanket. They talked. About her mother's quiet strength and her stepmother's cruelty. About his mother's illness before she died, and the loneliness that followed. About the fear of trusting people who always seemed to leave or betray. It wasn't passionate or dramatic. It was honest. By midnight, she had fallen asleep with her head on his shoulder. Khalid didn't move for hours. But just as things began to blossom, trouble found its way in. One breezy afternoon, Kendra was reading by the living room window when a familiar voice echoed through the house, cold, elegant, unmistakably venomous. Her stepmother. Dressed in designer ankara and holding a wine-colored envelope, she walked in like she owned the place. I see you're enjoying your little fairy tale, she said with a smirk. Kendra set down her book, already irritated. What do you want? Her stepmother handed her the envelope and sat down uninvited. You think Khalid Danjuma married you for love? She sneered. Open that. You'll see just how replaceable you are. Kendra slowly pulled out the contents. Photos. Khalid, at a restaurant. Sitting across from Isabella, the woman from his past. They weren't kissing, but the familiarity was intimate. Too intimate. Kendra's stomach twisted. She stared at the image of Isabella resting her chin on her hand, smiling at Khalid like a secret they shared. Her stepmother leaned back, sipping from the wine glass she had somehow found. He'll always choose power, darling. You're just a means to an end. Kendra didn't cry. She didn't shout. She simply stood, lips pressed in a thin line, and said quietly, Get out of my house. Her stepmother left, Victoria's smirk intact. But as the door closed, Kendra dropped the photos onto the floor and walked to the window, tears blurring the lagoon below. The Danjuma estate felt colder than usual that evening. The silence was not peaceful, but heavy, like something beautiful had cracked, and everyone in the house could feel it. Even the staff moved more quietly, sensing a storm none of them could see. Upstairs, Kendra Oken sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the envelope on her dresser. It had been hours since her stepmother left, and yet the images still burned in her mind. Khalid sitting with Isabella, his expression softer than she had ever seen directed at her. She knew the past couldn't be erased, but it was the timing that hurt. The secrecy, the emotional intimacy they had been building felt fragile now, like glass already beginning to shatter. She picked up her phone, thumb hovering over Khaled's number, then let out a bitter laugh and tossed it aside. If he really cared, he'd already be here explaining, she whispered to herself. But Khalid was not in the mansion. He was at the Danjuma Group headquarters, buried in crisis. A major investor had unexpectedly pulled out of a redevelopment project in Lekki. Rumors of financial instability were circulating. His legal team had spent the whole day trying to calm stakeholders, while his PR manager begged him to make a statement. But Khalid was tired, bone tired. Still, he didn't know that Kendra's heart was quietly breaking at home. At the mansion, she tried to distract herself with wine, jazz music, and a few forced pages of a book she couldn't follow. Eventually, she changed into a black hoodie, pulled her braids into a messy bun, and stepped out for a walk in the garden. It was there in the garden's stillness that her phone buzzed. She picked it up. Her fingers trembled. It was an anonymous tip, a voice message, muffled but clear enough. If Khalid doesn't sign over the marina project by Friday, something might happen to his little wife. Kendra froze. Her breath hitched. The voice was male, accented, and clearly serious. She listened to it twice. The second time, her fear turned to something sharper-edged. Meanwhile, at his office, Khalid stared at a file his assistant had just dropped in front of him. "Sir, you might want to look at this," George said, hesitating. It was a set of financial records and a trail of recent investments. One name jumped out. Ocon. Khalid's brows furrowed. He flipped the pages rapidly. The massive, anonymous investment that had saved the Marina Towers project, the one he'd believed came from a foreign partner, was from Kendra. His heart skipped. She had done it quietly. No announcement, no press. Just a wire transfer through a legal trust, meant to keep her identity hidden. A beat passed, then another. And all at once, Khalid saw everything he had missed. The silent way she watched him leave for work, the growing distance between them, the fact that she had stood by him even when he barely looked at her. He stood suddenly. "George," he said, voice rough, "get the car ready." By the time he arrived at the mansion, Kendra wasn't in her room. The guards told him she had gone out. Panic flickered in his chest. Where? Why? He checked his phone. No missed calls, no messages. He raced to his study and opened his laptop, searching for the voice message she'd sent earlier from her number, but it was locked with a password. He called her. No answer. Again. No answer. It wasn't until he reached the garden that he saw her. She stood by the gate, arms folded, phone in hand, staring out into the night like she was trying to control a storm inside her. "Kendra," he said out of breath. She didn't turn. "So you finally made it home." There was a pause. Then she faced him, her expression unreadable. "Why didn't you tell me?" Khalid blinked. "Tell you what?" "That you were meeting with her. With Isabella." His chest tightened. "I saw the photos," Kendra said quietly, voice trembling even as her stance remained strong. "And I've heard the whispers." Khalid exhaled slowly. "It wasn't what it looked like. She showed up uninvited. I didn't want you involved in her mess." "And that's your mistake," Kendra snapped, stepping closer. "You never think I can handle the truth. You still see me as that reckless girl who crashed parties and lived on headlines. Again, I don't." "Yes, you do," she said firmly. "You think I'm all flash and rebellion, but you didn't see the woman who saved your company without blinking." He froze. "I know it was you," he whispered. Kendra looked away, as if hearing him admit it made it worse. "I didn't do it for a thank you. I did it because I cared. I still do. But I can't keep proving myself to a man who keeps walls around his heart." Silence stretched between them. "I was afraid," he said finally. "Of what?" "Of needing you." His words hit her like a wave, so simple, yet so raw. "I thought I could control everything, that I could play this game and win without getting hurt. But I lost the moment I met you." Kendra blinked, her voice breaking. So what now? He stepped forward, reached for her hand, and this time she let him. I don't want to keep pretending, Khalid said softly. Not about the marriage, not about how I feel. No more deals, no more distance. Kendra didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just leaned her forehead against his chest and whispered, then prove it. That night, for the first time, they shared the same bed. Not as husband and wife in a contract, but as two people finally dropping their weapons. They didn't make love. They held each other in the dark, hearts finally aligned, the city breathing quietly around them. The sun rose slowly over Banana Island, casting golden light over the Danjuma estate. Inside the mansion, everything looked serene. Flawless breakfast table, garden trimmed to perfection, staff moving in quiet rhythm. But beneath the surface, everything had changed. Kendra and Khalid were no longer just cohabitants in a transactional marriage. Something had shifted, real, raw, still unspoken in some ways, but undeniable. Kendra now joined Khalid at the breakfast table, not for show, but for the quiet shared silences and the subtle warmth in his eyes when he passed her the tea. Khalid, in turn, had started coming home earlier. He'd work from the balcony beside her sketchpad. Sometimes he'd just watch her laugh at a meme or talk with the chef about spice levels. It wasn't romantic yet, not in the traditional sense, but it was intimate. It was growing, and it made them both vulnerable. At work, Khalid Danjuma was under siege. Despite Kendra's anonymous investment, enemies were circling. One by one, smaller stakeholders were being wooed away by a rival investor, a woman who had returned like a ghost from the past, Isabella. She had partnered with one of Khalid's former board members and was manipulating insider knowledge to sink his reputation. Rumors began swirling: mismanagement, internal debt, delayed salaries. But what chilled Khalid to the bone was the voice message Kendra had received. Sign over the Marina project or something might happen to your wife. He had heard it now, played it again and again until the voice was burned into his brain. The timing, the threat, the connection. It was Isabella's style, poison charm wrapped in silken power. She wasn't just trying to ruin him financially. She was willing to hurt Kendra to do it. Khalid called in his head of security and trusted assistant George. I want a full investigation, he said, his voice like ice. Surveillance, backgrounds, traffic footage. I want to know who's behind this message, and I want proof. George nodded. Yes, sir, we'll start immediately. Khalid sat back in his chair, gripping the edge of his desk. The world outside saw him as unshakable, a billionaire with quiet strength. But inside, his chest burned with fear. Not for himself, for Kendra. Kendra, unaware of how deeply Khalid was already fighting for her, tried to distract herself. She started sketching again, throwing herself into designs she once abandoned. Architecture, art, fashion. She converted the empty guest room into a mini studio and filled it with mood boards, books, and floor plans. It gave her focus, a sense of purpose beyond the whispers of gossip. One afternoon, while organizing her old files, she came across the last message her mother had sent her before she passed. A voice note, soft, full of warmth. You are more than what people see. You are light. Don't let this world dim you. She sat there and cried. Not because she was broken, but because she finally realized how close she had been to losing herself, and how this strange, unplanned marriage had somehow begun to bring her back. 2 nights later, Khalid came home earlier than usual. Kendra met him at the door, barefoot, wearing one of his oversized shirts. Her braids were tied up, her eyes clear and calm. You okay? She asked. He nodded. Come with me. She followed him silently to the inner courtyard. There, under the moonlight, was a small dinner setup. Just the two of them. Candlelight, grilled fish, basmati rice, chilled zobo. Kendra blinked, surprised. You're cooking now? No, I supervised, he said dryly. It counts. She smiled and sat down. So, what's the occasion? Khalid hesitated, then looked her in the eyes. I know about the investment. I know it was you, Her heart stuttered. He continued, voice soft but firm. You saved my company, and you didn't tell me. You protected me while I was too distracted to even ask if you were okay. Kendra swallowed. You were drowning. I didn't want to make you feel like you owed me. He reached for her hand. I do owe you, but not because of the money. Because you saw me. You stood by me, even when I didn't deserve it. She bit her lip, her fingers tightening around his. I'm sorry for every time I made you feel invisible. Kendra's throat tightened. She shook her head. You didn't make me invisible, Khalid. I just didn't believe I could be enough for someone like you. He stared at her. You're more than enough. They ate quietly after that. No grand declarations, no kisses under the moonlight. Just a new kind of peace, one that neither had known in a long time. But peace never lasted long. The next morning, George burst into Khalid's office with evidence. We found footage, sir, he said out of breath. A black sedan tailed Madame Kendra's car the day she received that message. Same license plate rented 2 days earlier. Guess who signed for it? Khalid's jaw clenched. Isabella. George nodded grimly. She's playing dangerous games. That night, Khalid didn't sleep. He watched Kendra lie beside him, unaware of the danger hovering near her. The scars on his past with Isabella ran deep, but now she had crossed a line even he couldn't forgive. He pulled Kendra closer in her sleep, whispering to the dark, no one touches her, and walks away. The following day, Khalid made a move. He called his legal team, sent a private investigator to the police, gathered every file, every image, every voice recording. Isabella wouldn't just be cut off. She'd be dragged into the light. And when justice came, it would be public, brutal, final. But Khalid knew what that meant. It would expose everything, his family name, the fragility of his company's recent survival, and most of all, the real reason his marriage had started, Kendra. She had become more than a name on a contract. She had become his everything, and he would do whatever it took to protect her, even if it meant exposing his darkest mistake to the world. The following morning, Kendra woke alone. The sheets beside her were cold, a soft imprint of where Khalid had lain hours earlier already fading. She sat up slowly, brushing a braid off her cheek. Lately, the distance between them had disappeared. In its place, silence that felt safe, the kind that didn't need explanation. She was getting used to the warmth of his presence, the way he asked about her sketches now, the protective hand he rested on her lower back in public. And now, he was gone again. But something told her this absence was different. She slipped on a robe and padded to the hallway. The staff were unusually tight-lipped. When she asked about Khalid, his personal assistant George only gave her a polite nod. Mr. Danjuma left early, madam. Meanwhile, across the city at a luxury hotel in Victoria Island, Isabella sipped champagne in a silk robe, her legs stretched out on a chaise lounge as she scrolled through her tablet. She had heard whispers. Khalid had found the investor. She smirked. Let him rage. Let him spiral. She hadn't played her final card yet. Just as she reached for a chocolate truffle, her suite door burst open. Police officers swept in. Her champagne glass shattered to the floor. What's the meaning of this? She shrieked. Khalid Danjuma walked in calmly behind them, dressed in a sharp black caftan, eyes hard as obsidian. You're being arrested, he said, for attempted harm, illegal surveillance, and corporate sabotage. Isabella's face went pale. You can't prove anything. I have more than enough, he said, stepping closer. You followed my wife. You threatened her. You orchestrated that voice message. You set up an entire media narrative to make her doubt me. And now, you'll answer for it. She lunged toward him, rage and desperation mixed in her voice. You were mine. You loved me. Khalid didn't flinch. I once thought I did, but love doesn't look like blackmail and broken trust. You lost me the moment you tried to hurt Kendra. As the police officers cuffed her hands behind her back, Isabella screamed, her voice echoing through the hallway. But Khalid just stood there unmoved. Justice had come. Back at the mansion, Kendra sat in the garden, notebook in hand, but mind far away. When Khalid returned later that afternoon, she stood the moment she saw him. There was a stiffness to his stride, a weight to his silence. "What happened?" she asked gently. He came closer, searching her eyes. "It's over. Isabella. She was the one behind everything." Kendra's heart thudded. "The threats?" He nodded. "Everything. The voice message, the black car, the investors she pulled from the company." Kendra exhaled, anger mixing with relief. "She could have had me. Killed." "She won't touch you again," he said. "I made sure of it." They stood in silence for a moment, the tension lingering like leftover rain. Then Khalid said, "There's something else you need to know." He walked her into his study, opened a drawer, and handed her the original marriage contract, the one they both signed. Kendra took it slowly, eyes scanning the familiar lines. "I want to destroy it," Khalid said. "This contract, it was built on ego, on control, on everything I no longer want." He held her gaze. "If you choose to stay, I want it to be without obligation. No more games, no more bets." Kendra's fingers trembled slightly around the paper. "I should have told you sooner," he said, "but I needed to fight my own demons first. I didn't want to offer you love still carrying rot from my past." Tears welled in her eyes, not because of heartbreak, but because he finally saw her. She stepped forward, took the contract, and slowly tore it in half. "This marriage," she said, "will be real, or it won't be at all." Khalid looked at her like she was the only thing that mattered in the world. "It's already real," he whispered. And then for the first time they kissed. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't driven by need. It was a soft, soul-deep promise, one born not from passion alone, but from everything they had endured. Later that night, Kendra curled against Khalid's chest in bed. "Why did you fight so hard for me?" she asked, her voice sleepy. "Because I couldn't bear the thought of a world where you didn't exist beside me," he replied. She smiled. "That's the first thing you've said that sounded like a line from a Nollywood film." He chuckled. "Then I'll say more of them, if that's what it takes to keep you." She nestled closer, listening to the rhythm of his heartbeat. For the first time in forever, she felt safe. But not all wounds heal at once. The world still watched. The tabloids still speculated. There were board meetings ahead, family confrontations, a reputation to rebuild. But Kendra and Khalid were no longer opponents. They were partners. And the war outside could wait. Because for now, they had found peace inside each other. 2 weeks after Isabella's arrest, the Danjuma estate began to feel different. Not just because the threat was gone, but because Kendra Okan was stepping into herself not as a wife defined by a man's name, but as a woman rising in her own purpose. She stood by the balcony that morning, wearing a flowy orange blouse and linen trousers. Barefoot, holding a glass of fresh juice. The lagoon shimmered in the distance, and for the first time in a long while the city felt like a blank canvas. Khalid walked into the room moments later, still adjusting his watch. "You have that look again," he said, smiling. "What look?" "That I'm about to change the world look." Kendra chuckled. "I'm relaunching my architecture portfolio. I've booked a workspace at a new creative hub in Victoria Island. The foundation my mom left. It's time I do something with it." Khalid's smile deepened. "I'm proud of you." She tilted her head. "No unsolicited support?" He raised his hands. "Only if you ask. You're the CEO of your dream now." Kendra walked over, placed a kiss on his cheek, and whispered, "Good answer." That afternoon, she visited the creative hub for the first time, an open space floor filled with designers, architects, and young professionals who buzzed with ambition. Kendra walked in quietly, unnoticed at first, in high-waisted jeans and minimal makeup. No press, no entourage. Only a fire in her chest and a sketchbook in her bag. She set up her desk, rolled out her plans, and began working on a modular housing idea she'd started 2 years ago. A young intern offered her coffee, not even realizing who she was. Kendra smiled. She preferred it that way. She was no longer the girl from the tabloids. She was the woman building something real. Back at the Danjuma Group boardroom, Khalid faced a different kind of battle. With Isabella gone, many of the damaged investor relationships were beginning to heal. The quiet strength of his leadership, combined with the anonymous investors, Kendra's miracle bailout, had sparked new loyalty among shareholders. But one particular board member, a bitter rival from his father's era, was still skeptical. "We need to know the truth about that bailout," the man growled during a tense meeting. "Where did that money come from? Who is the mystery angel?" Khalid leaned forward, voice calm. "All you need to know is that we're solvent, stable, and stronger than ever. And if the media gets wind of this, let them," Khalid cut in. "We survived the storm. Our story will sell itself in the results." The room went quiet. He had spoken like a man who had nothing left to prove. Later that evening, Kendra returned home to find the courtyard lit with fairy lights. A jazz trio played softly in one corner. Kali had prepared dinner, again, with help, of course. She walked in slowly, stunned. "You cooked twice in a month?" she teased, wide-eyed. "Don't get used to it," he said, pulling her chair out. "But tonight is a celebration." "What are we celebrating?" "You." She blinked. "The real you," Khalid said, lifting his wine glass. "The woman who saved my company, who taught me that silence isn't strength unless it's honest. The one who reminded me that love isn't control, it's choice." Kendra stared at him for a moment, then whispered, "You talk like someone who's already in love." He met her eyes. "Because I am." The words landed softly, but deeply. She didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, she reached for his hand and held it. That night, while lying in bed, Kendra pulled her old voice recorder from her drawer. It was something she used during her rebellious years to document thoughts she never shared. She pressed record. "Today, I was seen, not because of what I wore or where I stood, but because I stood tall in my own skin. For years, I thought love meant surrendering myself, but now I know. It's about becoming even more of who I already am." Kali walked in mid-recording. "You're talking to yourself again?" "Talking to the future," she smiled, stopping the recorder. He walked over, pulled her into his arms, and whispered against her temple, "I see your future, and I want to walk beside it." In the days that followed, Kendra launched a charity housing project in Makoko, using part of her mother's foundation. She named it the Okon Shelter Initiative. She and Khalid appeared in public only when necessary. Their love wasn't for the blogs anymore. It was for late-night strolls on Banana Island, for texts at 2 a.m., for coffee on the steps of their garden. And it was real, flawed, still healing, but beautiful. The quiet moments after peace are always the most dangerous, when your heart starts to hope again, when you forget what pain feels like, until it returns. It started with a phone call. Kendra Oken was in her studio at the Creative Hub, going over designs for her second shelter site in Surulere. She was in the zone, sketching, muttering under her breath, her brows furrowed in focus, when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Almost. But something told her to answer. "Kendra Oken?" the voice asked, deep and unfamiliar. "Yes, who's this?" "I suggest you check the news before your husband does." Click. The line went dead. Her heart clenched, fingers trembling. She opened her browser. There it was, a leaked video. Khalid, at a restaurant, with Isabella. It was an old clip, clearly from the month before her arrest, but it had been edited to look recent. The angle made it appear romantic. They were laughing, leaning close. And the headline? Is the billionaire CEO still in love with his ex? Where does that leave his new wife? Kendra's face went pale. Her past screamed in her ear, "You'll never be enough. They'll always choose someone else. You're just the girl they clean up, not the one they love for real." She tried to push it down. Tried, but it still hurt. At the Danjuma estate, Khalid was on a call with his legal team when George barged in. "Sir, it's trending." Khalid clicked the link before George could explain. He froze. The room turned cold. Isabella. Again. Someone had leaked old footage to trigger chaos. He ended the call mid-sentence and grabbed his keys. "Get the car! I'm going to her!" Kendra hadn't left her studio. She sat curled up on the lounge chair, staring at nothing. Her phone had buzzed with texts from friends, tabloids, and even her stepmother, who sent a single message. "Told you! Never forget who they always go back to." Her hands trembled. She wanted to believe Khalid. She wanted to scream that she knew this was old, that she trusted him. But all she could feel was the weight of being publicly humiliated. Again. A knock. "Kendra?" Khalid stepped inside, breathless. She didn't move. "I saw the footage," he said, carefully approaching. She finally looked at him, her voice cold. "Is it real?" "Yes," he replied without hesitation. "But it's from before her arrest, before everything changed." She stood. "Why didn't you tell me there were more meetings?" "Because I didn't think they mattered. She had no power over me. I thought I was protecting you." "That's the problem, Khalid," she snapped, eyes flashing. "You still think I'm something you have to manage or shield. But I'm not fragile. I'm your wife." The word hung between them, heavier than ever before. "I know," he said softly, "and I failed you again." Kendra turned away, arms folded. I can't go back to being a joke, to everyone thinking I'm just a placeholder until you figure out what you want." Khalid stepped closer, his voice breaking. "You're not a placeholder. You're the only real thing I have, the only thing I want." She didn't answer. But she didn't walk away either. He stood behind her, gently wrapping his arms around her waist. "I'll hold a press conference," he whispered. "I'll tell the world the truth. I'll make it clear, publicly, loudly, that you are my wife, my partner, and the only woman I love." Kendra's lips parted. He continued, "Not for PR, not for redemption, for you, for us." Finally, she leaned into him. "I'm tired of fighting ghosts," she whispered, "but I'll fight them with you. Just stop keeping me in the dark." He nodded, his chin brushing her shoulder. No more secrets. The next day, the press conference was held at the Danjuma Group headquarters. Khalid stood behind the podium in a crisp black agbada, calm, authoritative, unshakable. Kendra watched from the side, wearing a royal blue dress that hugged her gracefully. She looked stunning, poised. But only he could see the way her hand trembled just slightly behind her back. He stepped to the mic. "To those speculating about my marriage," he began, "let me make this clear. I am married to Kendra Okondenjuma, and I am deeply, irrevocably in love with her." The room erupted. Cameras flashed, journalists whispered, tweets exploded. Kendra's breath caught in her throat. He continued, "There is no other woman. There is no confusion. Any footage released in the past 24 hours was an intentional attack to damage not just my company, but the woman who stood beside me when no one else would." He paused, eyes turning toward her. "And I will protect her with everything I am." The press roared with questions, but Khalid stepped down, walked toward Kendra, and reached for her hand. She took it. They stood together before the cameras, not as a PR strategy, but as partners bound by choice. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, Kendra looked at Khalid with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. He brushed a braid from her cheek. "Thank you for staying." She nodded. "Let's build something that doesn't fall every time the wind blows." He smiled. "A fortress." "No," she whispered, leaning into him. "A home." 3 months had passed since the chaos. 3 months since Kendra Okon and Khalid Danjuma tore up the contract that began their marriage and decided to write their own vows. Without ink, without ceremony, but with every shared breath, every choice to stay. They had survived the tabloids. Isabella, betrayal, insecurity, and their own fears. And now they were building. Not just love, but a life. The Danjuma estate felt different now. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was peaceful, comfortable, the kind of quiet filled with jazz in the mornings and laughter from the kitchen in the evenings. Kendra's sketches were all over the house, taped to windows, pinned to corkboards. The staff had grown used to her walking barefoot in encore shorts, carrying coffee in one hand and blueprints in the other. Khalid's office no longer looked like a war bunker. There was a new plant by the window, a framed, candid photo of Kendra sitting cross-legged on the floor, laughing as she painted over a wall she'd insisted needed color. She had convinced him to repaint the living room sage green. And he had let her. Because home, she said, shouldn't feel like a boardroom. One warm Saturday, they held a small event at the Ocon Shelter Initiative in Surulere. It wasn't flashy. No celebrities. Just kids running barefoot, balloons tied to fences, and Kendra in a white linen dress, with her hands covered in paint from helping the children design a mural. Khalid stood beside her, wearing jeans and a simple caftan shirt, his arm around her waist, watching her light up as she spoke with the mothers and artisans who had helped build the space. "You're in your element," he whispered to her. She smiled, brushing a curl from her face. "This is who I've always been. I just forgot for a while." Khalid kissed her temple. "Thank you for remembering." Later that night, under the stars on the rooftop of their home, Khalid brought out a velvet box. Kendra blinked. "Again? We're already married." He nodded. "Yes, but I proposed the first time for a bet. This time I want to do it for the truth." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, not grand but meaningful. A diamond flanked by 2 emeralds, her birthstone and his. He got down on one knee, not for theatrics, but because this moment deserved reverence. "Kendra Oken, will you marry me again? But this time for real. No terms, no contracts, just us, as partners, as friends, as lovers. For life." Kendra's eyes shimmered, not from surprise, but from peace. She knelt beside him and wrapped her arms around his neck. Yes. Their second wedding took place at a small beach in Lagos, attended only by family, close friends, and a few kids from the Shelter Initiative who ran down the sand barefoot and clapped during the vows. Kendra wore a cream silk gown, barefoot, her braids piled in a loose bun with cowries tucked in. Khalid wore a simple white agbada, barefoot too, with a shy smile that only she could pull out of him. They kissed as the sun set behind them. No cameras, no newspapers, just truth and love. That night, as they lay in bed, limbs tangled, soft music playing in the distance, Khalid traced circles on her shoulder. "Do you ever think about how we started?" he asked. Kendra smiled. "All the time, and I thank God we tore that contract up." He chuckled. "Same." She shifted closer. "You know what the biggest miracle is?" "What?" "That I'm not scared anymore." "Of what?" "Of being loved." He kissed her softly, his hand resting over her heart. "Good, because I'm never going to stop." A year later, Kendra Dinjuma stood on a stage at the launch of her architectural firm's 3rd community housing site. She was now one of Lagos's most respected young philanthropists. She wore a burnt orange suit, stood tall, confident, and introduced herself not as the billionaire's wife, but as a woman with a mission. In the front row, Khalid watched with quiet pride, holding a sketch she once doodled on the back of a napkin, now built into a standing structure behind her. As she ended her speech, Kendra looked down at him, smiled, and said into the mic, "I once thought my life was built on chaos, but sometimes the storm leads you exactly where you were meant to be." And in the crowd, everyone clapped. But Khalid, he just smiled, because he already knew she was home, and so was he. Dear viewers, what lesson did you take away from this dramatic tale? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.